So in the last lecture, we talked about art and culture being affected, technology, all these things coming out of post World War One era, prior to World War Two, and we had also new European states emerging with the you know conflict between democracy versus dictatorship. And these lines could actually be blurred at times, and they always are actually. But we had numerous new nations that were emerging out of World War One. Short-lived communist regime in Hungary, 1919. Problems of minorities. What's the problem? The problem is that nationalism that was emerging assumed that particular land masses and linguistic groups belong together. So gypsies and Jews, for example, just name one example, would be seen as parasites. If Germany is for Germans and you have Jews and gypsies, or Roma people, it's the more politically correct term, it doesn't matter how long they're there, they're not supposed to be there. If I take a thorn and I stick it in my leg and the thorn remains there for 10, 20 years, it's still a foreign object. That's how nationalism was viewing minorities within the broader linguistic groups, okay? And that kind of explains what you're going to see it's happening with the Jews and also the not so talked about treatment of the Roma people by like Nazi Germany and some other minority groups. They're going to be seen as kind of parasites that need to be removed from the greater body of the ethnos or the ethnic group. There was a fear of communism. Soviet Union taking power, the Russian Revolution just shook up things. Can you imagine Donald Trump types, or even Bill Gates, business people, big corporations, big business men, industrialists? Their greatest fear is having their wealth taken from them, or the workers revolting, or let's say striking. Just a very threat of a union freaks them out. And in here we have rumors of a country where literally the workers overthrow. This is the belief that a revolution destroyed the capitalist class from power to be in opposition to capitalism. So you can imagine. And its lack of belief in God is something that you could get the common person, even the industrial worker, to be against. I mean, communism had its own, at this time, it hasn't fully developed a history in which you could kind of like try to show people and say, hey, look how bad it is over there. You'd rather be over here, right? But, just for instance, the kind of atheism that comes out of there wouldn't resonate with a lot of more traditional people, no matter what class they were. But by the early 1930s, all new nations except Finland and Czechoslovakia were essentially dictatorial. Okay, so that's just something to kind of think about. Like just the background between what's going on. Again, I can't cover this in a lot of detail, so just go there. So fascism in Italy. So, Hitler is seen as the perfect example of fascism, but it was really started by Mussolini. The word fascism is an Italian word. Might even be Latin, but right now I'm pretty sure it's Italian. And Italians felt betrayed by Versailles. So first of all, there was discontent in Italy also. Mussolini was in the Socialist Party. He got kicked out at one point. And he created this idea of fascism, an organic collective community. Okay. Now, it's very popular right now, and it has been in the past. I mean, it's not been only brought up now, but the idea of equating communism and fascism is almost the same thing. Sometimes you even hear like Obama call by people a communist fascist. And it's kind of funny, and I'll tell you why. I mean, it's true that the idea of collectivity over the individual has something in similarity between fascism and socialism. That many fascists were socialists or communists, and sometimes they would, other groups would kind of abandon one camp and go to the other. But we're gonna see. I have it linked in your reading and viewing, but we'll go over just a little bit about fascism. So in 1924, Mussolini takes power, okay, in Italy. But notice this, just on the top, and I'll let you get a chance. You could pause and look at this more. But he says fascism is the complete opposite of the so-called scientific and Marxian socialism. Okay, and he basically says that. He goes into a long detail, which you can look at, why he sees that it's so different from communism. And he says, and above all, fascism denies that class war can be the predominant force in the transformation of society. Oops. So he's saying this is why we are different than basically communists, Marxist socialists or Marxist communists. Then he says, after socialism, fascism combats the whole complex system of democratic ideology, liberal democracy, in other words, and repudiates it. Okay? So fascism was against communism first, and then also democracy. So its first enemy was communism. So I want you to think about that. Despite the fact that there's certain things that look very similar, like I said, somebody sent me a link to some guy who's giving a lecture on how the left in America is really fascist, and that liberals come from fascist ideas and blah blah blah, and it's just kind of ridiculous. Just take a look and see some of the ideas he has, but read the primary text that I showed. Okay. So anyhow, that's kind of what's going on there with the fascist ideology. There was also the Great and Global Depression. Just to say this, I'm going to kind of just go over this really quickly. We all know that there was an economic boom in the 20s that was an illusion, and then that just crashes with a vengeance. You can imagine capitalism and democracy basically was failing to persuade people that it was worth keeping. And look at right now. Capitalism and democracy, really, is it working right now? Now, does that mean that these things actually don't work or that they must be thrown away? I'm not addressing that here. I'm merely pointing out that voting sometimes, doesn't feed you. And exploitation by greater powers or whatever, they can lead people to become very cynical, right? Remember that word I used? And to just look to other things. Now, nowadays, in the Islamic world now, they did have socialism, nationalism, and all sorts of other ideologies to go to. And we'll learn later on that the West helped, along with Saudi Arabia, to kill off all that opposition. What alternatives do people have in the Islamic world? Al-Qaeda, right? They're under dictatorships now that aren't satisfying the needs of the people. Where do you go? Where do you go? So this is always a prevalent issue right here. Okay, so in the U.S. government, there was different approaches to figuring out how to deal with this. I'm going to stop right here, and we're going to go to just that topic.